theyeshiva.net.
Henry Kissinger is considered probably the greatest diplomat and negotiator of the 20th century. For many years, he served as the Secretary of State of the U.S. He's originally a German Jew, who ultimately reached great political heights here in this country. Whether cherished or loathed, people could not deny his skills at diplomacy and negotiation. He coined a phrase they attributed to him called shuttle diplomacy. And they once asked him what shuttle diplomacy is. He said, it's basically using my diplomatic skills to get a Siberian peasant to marry Rockefeller's daughter, or to get Rockefeller's daughter to marry a Siberian peasant. They said, it's impossible. How do you do it? He said, well, if your name is Kissinger, everything is possible. He said, how do you do it? He says, well, I take a plane to Siberia. I meet a real Russian Siberian peasant, and I say, I have a great American girl for you. He says, I'm crazy? Why would I go for an American woman? There's great, great women right here in Russia. And I say, no. She's not just a simple American girl. This is Rockefeller's daughter. He says, that changes everything. Okay. Then I take my plane to Switzerland. The Swiss bank is looking for a new president. I say, I have an exceptional president for you. He's a Siberian peasant. They say, you're mad, Mr. Kissinger? President of the Swiss bank? He says, no. He's Rockefeller's son-in-law. That changes everything. Okay? Now I have to go to Mr. Rockefeller. So I go to Rockefeller and I make the proposition. I say, I have a wonderful groom, potential groom for your daughter. He's a peasant who grew up in Siberia. Mr. Kissinger, to insult my intelligence and my daughter in such a brute fashion? No. He's the president of the Swiss bank. That changes everything. He calls his daughter, Helene, come in. We have a great potential fiancé for you. Really, who? He's the president of the Swiss bank. She looks at her father. Bankers, snobby, pompous, arrogant, self-centered, money-hungry, narcissistic, care nothing about society or humanity. Everything is money, and prestige and status. Never will I marry such a fellow. He says, no. He's a peasant from Siberia. She says, that changes everything. And so the shidduch happens b'shah tova u'mutzlachas. I share with you this anecdote because of the story, one of the more enigmatic and ambiguous stories in all of Chumash and really in all of the Tanakh that is recorded at the end, at the grand finale of Parshas Bahaloischa. The portion of Bahaloischa generally is loaded with many a narrative that require lots of decoding, explanation, and application. But probably from all of them, what takes the cake, so to speak, is the story at the end. And what's really so strange about it is that the Torah is obviously intentionally ambiguous as to completely leave us in the dark as to know what happened. What we know is that suddenly, out of the blue, there's a conversation about Moshe Rabbeinu's marriage by his sister-in-law. Now, we all know from family experiences that very often sisters of brothers have issues with the girls they marry. That's a common phenomenon. You can hear conversations in families. One sister turns to the other brother and says, I can't believe who our brother ended up with. How did this happen? I make a bar mitzvah, I make a chasana, took a hotel, I hosted her and her kids for 3 days. All she did was complain. A whole weekend. Nothing was good enough. Not the rooms, not the tables. I don't know what. And you know, our brother is a changed man. And so this happens in families all the time. People analyze sisters-in-law and brothers-in-law quite extensively and quite dramatically. That's a common phenomenon. But when you look at this story, suddenly, out of the blue, there's no incident that precedes it. Nothing dramatic seemed to occur, at least in a revealed fashion. Suddenly, from nowhere, the Torah says, and I'm going to quote so you can hear the ambiguity, V'tedaber Aaron u'Miriam b'Moshe. I'm sorry, V'tedaber Miriam v'Aaron b'Moshe. That order is important. Miriam and Aaron begin speaking about Moshe. Now, right away, one's ears perk up. What is happening? They're just analyzing Moshe. So the pasuk doesn't allow us to doubt what they spoke about. Al oidos ha'isha hakushis asher lakach. What did they speak about Moshe? Not about him personally, but about the Kushis. That's how the Torah describes the the Kushite woman which he married. Ki isha Kushis lakach. Because, by the way, he married a woman from Kush. So it's not that they were talking about something that didn't happen. They spoke about this woman that he took, that he married. What did they say? Who is this woman? What was the issue? Guessing game. Doesn't say. We know they spoke about his marriage. What? Why now? We don't know. Vayoimru, what did they say? So you would think now you would get some details. It only makes it more mysterious. They say, Aaron and Miriam say, Har vayoimru harak ach b'Moshe diber Adonai haloi gam banu diber vayishma Adonai. Miriam and Aaron say to each other, we can't understand. Is it only Moshe who hears the voice of the divine, to whom God speaks? He spoke also to us. And the pasuk concludes the conversation and said, and God heard. And God heard. Vayishma Hashem. And now the story is over. They had a conversation. We're supposed to figure out what they said about his wife, but they said something. We know that they complained that God speaks to them too, so there was something that had to do with that. And all we know is that Hashem heard the conversation. Now the Torah makes a shift, and also very uncharacteristically and unusually starts analyzing the personality of Moshe. Now, anyone who learns Chumash at this point, you've known Moshe for a very long time. Moshe was introduced first in the beginning of Shmos during his birth, and since then there is not a single parsha where he does not play a central role, because he was chosen as the leader, the Rebbe, the Redeemer, the shepherd of the Jewish people. So he is the man who, so to speak, as he says, he stands in between the people and God. Anochi oimed beinechem ubein Hashem lahagid lechem bein Hashem ubeinechem lahagid lechem es dvar Hashem. Every parsha, his name is mentioned, not once but many times, besides Tetzaveh, where his name is not mentioned, but it's still all about, he still plays a central role in the parsha. So you would think when he's growing up, you'll give us a tribute to his personality. Why was he chosen? Why him? Why nobody else? But we know nothing. We know a few stories about him when he was young, and we know that God chooses him to go redeem the Jewish people. And so we lived with Moshe. He came to Egypt. He was born in Egypt. He ran from Egypt. He came back to Egypt. He confronted Paro. He took the Jewish people out. He went through and took them through the sea, took them to the mountain, broke the tablets, told them to build a mishkan, communicated to them their heritage, their Torah, and their mitzvahs, and now they're already on the journey. Quite a while after they left Egypt, more than a year, Aaron and Miriam are speaking about Moshe's wife, and suddenly the Torah goes off on a tangent, or it seemed the Torah goes off to a different discussion and starts analyzing Moshe and says, Va'ish Moshe anav ma'od mikol adam asher al pnei adam. Moshe was the humblest person from all people on the face of the earth. You wouldn't find such a humble person. How does that come in? That also comes in here to the story. What happens next in the fourth pasuk is, suddenly Hashem turns to Moshe and Aaron and Miriam, all three siblings, and asked them to go out of their tents or wherever they were to the Oyel Moed, to the sanctuary, to the Mishkan, and that's when God speaks to Aaron and Miriam exclusively. And he goes on to extol the unique virtues of Moshe Rabbeinu. And he said, you are prophets, and I speak to prophets, but loichein avdi Moshe. Moshe is in a different category. And he describes him in 4 words, b'chol beisi nemanhu. He is faithful throughout my home, which is obviously a euphemism, an expression. He is faithful, neman, loyal, dedicated, faithful, trustworthy, neman, in my home. I speak to him mouth to mouth. I speak to him in a vision and not in riddles. He beholds the image of the divine. How were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moshe? And the pasuk, the story continues. God gets upset and leaves. And that's the end of the story. Anybody reading this, you read the verses and you're like, there's a lot going on, but what happened? Why don't you tell us what happened? The next scene, we know the next scene is that Miriam becomes a mitzayras, a condition that would be somewhat similar, although not the same as leprosy. She's quarantined according to the laws of leprosy outside of the camp for 7 days. Moshe beseeches God to heal her, and he prays for her. Ana, keil na, refa na la. Miriam ultimately is healed. 7 days later, she comes back, and we move on. And yet, it's one of the things that we are told to remember forever. Those who say every morning the Sheish Schiros, the 6 mitzvahs that the Torah says to remember, one of them is Zachar es asher asa Hashem elakecha Miriam baderech b'tzeischa mitzrayim. Remember what Hashem did to Miriam on your journey out of Egypt. Now the other 5, we can appreciate well why it's important to remember. L'man tisker esem tzeischa meretz Mitzrayim, the exodus of Egypt. Maimed Har Sinai, the standing at Sinai. There's Shabbos, Zachar esem Shabbos lekatsha. There's the story of Amalek. There's the Chet HaEgel. Why was it so important to know about an individual incident that happened with one person? It wasn't a national event. They didn't define the Jewish people. Most people didn't even know the story. They probably saw Miriam's illness at some point. Perhaps yes, perhaps not. But this was a very private, intimate family story by nature. It was a conversation between Miriam and Aaron. What are we trying to remember? The commentators debate this story. As usual, everything in every story in Chumash is debated by many commentators because it lends itself to so many different interpretations. The first question is, what happened? What were they talking about? If you read the pasuk without any preconceived notions or any information preceding your reading of the pasuk, it just says that Miriam and Aaron spoke about Moshe al oidos ha'isha hakushis asher lakach, about the Cushite woman whom he married, ki isha kushis lakach, because he married a Cushite woman. That's what they spoke about. Without any other interpretation, what do you hear from these words? They didn't like her. They felt something was inappropriate, something was wrong. Rashi, which has become the most famous commentary on Chumash, and in this story as well, says that the pasuk is not telling you the end of the story. It's one of those brief psukim that delete the punchline, or at least part of the punchline. As Rashi puts it, he married her and he separated from her. That's what upset Miriam so deeply. Rashi needs to explain this because he's trying to understand what they were lamenting about, what they were upset, and why suddenly now. So Rashi, based on the Medrash, and this is the truth, this is the Targum Onkelos. The Onkelos Aramaic translation on Chumash also inserts those words. He married a beautiful woman. Rashi also says Kushis is a euphemism. Kushis means dark. So Rashi says, who is this woman? It's Tzipora. It's his wife. We know that he married Zipporah because it's a story in Shmois. He was a fugitive from Egypt. He came to Midian. He met Zipporah, Yisro's daughter, and he married her. And they had two sons, Gershom and Eliezer. We know this a long time ago. What happened to that marriage? So what happened to that marriage, and this is how Rashi explains why it gets put into the Torah right here. It's quite an intense story. Moshe Rabbeinu was complaining to Hashem that he's a lonely man. He can't carry the burden of the nation alone. So Hashem says, you need to delegate. And he asks him to choose 70 people, 70 great human beings who will help him carry the burden of leadership. And all of them become prophets. There are two more by the names of Eldad and Medad who also start prophesying. A young child comes to Moshe and starts screaming and says, two people are prophesying. They're not part of the group that you chose, Eldad and Medad. And Yehoshua tells Moshe Rabbeinu that they have to be incarcerated. This is a threat to your authority. And Moshe responds in those immortal, noble words. If you could say one of the most noble expressions in all of the Tanakh, Hamekane atali umiyitein kol am Hashem neviyim kiyitin Hashem esruchai alayim. Yehoshua, you're jealous for me? My desire is that the entire nation of God becomes prophets, that Hashem confers His Spirit on all of them. I really am not perturbed that there are two new prophets. And the next scene, Miriam and Aaron are now talking about their sister-in-law. Vu, was, when, where, what? Mela after a Sheva Brachas. Verstehe? There's a lot of tension that built up. After a Bar Mitzvah, fine. Even after a bris, she gave the wrong name. Okay, we get it. We know. Vu, was, when? Suddenly. So Rashi fills in the gaps and says that when the child came running to Moshe and said, Eldad and Medad have become two prophets, Zipporah, his wife, almost what you would call today an unconscious, a Freudian slip, it just came out of her and said, woe to their wives. Oy l'nishayseim shalelo. Woe to their wives. And Miriam, who we all know was a sensitive woman, a sensitive girl, and now a sensitive woman, heard this. And she grilled her sister-in-law. Why do you say this? And that's when Zipporah, for the first time, shared with Miriam about her own personal fate, that Moshe, who was, so to speak, owned by the nation, has separated from her in terms of physical relations. Now understand what this means. If Miriam didn't know about it, that means they were in the same tent. They were in the same home. This wasn't the classic separation you hear about. It was a separation that only two people knew about, Zipporah and Moshe. They were living together. If not, Miriam would have known right after Sinai that Moshe and Zipporah are not together. She never knew this. Zipporah never told anybody. Moshe never told anybody. So Moshe and Zipporah, Moshe didn't just run. Moshe and Zipporah were loyally married. And the Gemara discusses that Moshe Rabbeinu was told before Matan Torah to tell all the Jewish men and women that for 3 days before Sinai, they should physically separate, not to have intimacy. After Matan Torah, Hashem told Moshe, tell the Jewish people, go back to your tents, meaning go back to normal marital life. Va'ata, you stay with me. Moshe inferred from that on his own, that if he's going to be a prophet every moment, he must remain in a particular state. But he was with Zipporah. That's clear from the story. If not, Miriam would have known earlier. But Zipporah cried out and said, their marriage is never going to be the same. My husband belongs to the people. He belongs to 4 million people. Doesn't belong to me as a private, intimate man. Very dramatic moment. Miriam, who's again the sensitive girl or woman, says, Zipporah, I'll take care of my brother. I'll take care. I always took care of him. I told my father what to do with him. I told my mother what to do with him. I told the daughter of Paro what to do with him. I saw this kid. I saw him born. We put him in a casket. I watched him. He's my baby. Which is, of course, why after the splitting of the sea, it's Miriam who the Torah dedicates a separate story about how she led all the women in song and dance with the tupim and the mecholos, with the drums and the tambourines. Why suddenly Miriam? Why couldn't it be part of the national narrative? And the answer, of course, is that for Miriam, it was the circle. Machal in Hebrew means a dance. It also means a circle. It was a circle being completed because she is the one who preceded Moshe, the one who prophesied to her parents, you're going to have a child who will save the day and save the people. So Miriam naturally tells Tzipporah, I'll take care of it. What does an older sister do? What do the older sisters in your family do when you see that your baby brother is not behaving? What do? Yeah, you run to your other brother, right? You run to your other brother. You send a text and you say, emergency meeting. I have to meet you tonight. We got to shape up issues in the family. So she runs to her brother Aaron. So this is how Rashi understands the story, and they talk about Moshe. They weren't bad-mouthing Moshe. They were trying to solve a challenging situation because of their sensitivity. So to Tzipporah, so when it says they spoke about the woman, it's not that they spoke about the woman, they didn't approve of the marriage. What they didn't approve of is how he was behaving in the marriage. And of course Hashem tells them that you're great people, but you don't know everything about Moshe Rabbeinu. Somehow, this story is unresolved. What happens at the end? Does Tzipporah feel better afterwards? Well, her sister-in-law Miriam know about the story now. Aaron knows about the story. Moshe will not defend himself because he's Anav Ma'od, he's humble. And what we also know is that Miriam remains outside of the camp for 7 days. Usually people don't put two and two together. Miriam, those 7 days, was a lonely woman. Perhaps Tzipporah never felt alone again because her sister-in-law knew what her life was like. And the moment she had Miriam, who just knew about her story, everything changes. Sometimes the greatest antidote to loneliness is not necessarily remedying the situation and the circumstances, but simply sharing it with somebody who gets it. Could Miriam have gotten it? Not really. She probably had a very different type of marriage. She was married to a man named Kalev, who was a very different type of person. But Miriam was right after the story, Miriam was in isolation for 7 days. Now, being in isolation for 7 days is not the same isolation like in a marriage. But Miriam, right afterwards, was completely disconnected. This is part of the story. I suspect it's part of the story. And as far as we know, life moves on. Many of the commentators struggle with Rashi's interpretation. First of all, why didn't you call her by her name Tzipporah? Why did she suddenly become a Cushite woman? We know what Cush is. Cush is Ethiopia or Sudan, right? You're familiar. In geography, Cush is the Hebrew name either for Ethiopia or Sudan. She was not from Ethiopia, she was not from Sudan, she was from a place called Midian, a completely different region. Why is she called Cushis? Rashi struggles. He says she was so beautiful. So some say Cushis, just like, which means a dark woman, just like when somebody is dark, it's so visible, you can't argue with it. That's how powerful her beauty and glitter was. You have to understand, why would the Torah want to point that out right here in the story? Perhaps they understood that there was something else going on. The Even Ezra says that due to the region where she lived, she had a very dark complexion. That's why she's called Cushis. He agrees that it's Tzipporah. The problem is, however, still, why would the Torah not use the name Tzipporah? Number one. Number two, why don't you tell the story? They spoke about the woman that he married and he separated. The Torah doesn't want to be explicit about it, you have to say. You have to somehow figure that out. How are you supposed to figure it out? So a lot of the commentators struggle with this comment of Rashi. The Rashbam, who follows also a very literal interpretation, says it's impossible to put it into these words. The Rashbam associates it with a completely different story. And that is that Moshe, when he ran from Egypt, he went to Midian somehow he ended up somewhere else, because he came back to Egypt when he was an older person. He stood in front of Pharaoh when he was 80. And at some point, he ran from Egypt when he was a younger man. So where was he all these years? So there's a tradition that he was in Kush, in Ethiopia or Sudan. And that's where he married a woman. That's who they were talking about. There's another issue, Rabbi Yosef ibn Kaspi, who has a completely different interpretation in this pasuk. And he says the Torah is not talking about Tzipora. And he brings another very interesting proof. It says they spoke about Moshe concerning the Cushite woman whom he married, because he married a Cushite woman. If it's talking about Tzipora, we know that he married Tzipora. Why do you have to repeat yourself? They spoke, imagine it would say, Miriam and Aaron spoke about Moshe because he spoke about Moshe concerning his wife Tzipora whom he married, because he married Tzipora. Really? We know that. So Ibn Kaspi, Rabbi Yosef ibn Kaspi, he lived in Provence in southern France in the 14th century. He has a whole different interpretation. He says that he completely disagrees with all these commentators who insert words that are missing. He says this is not a way how you could learn Torah and everybody could do whatever they want and misconstrue every verse. They say, oh, there's a word missing. Thank you. He's vehemently opposed to the interpretation given by probably most of the Mefarshim. And he says Moshe married a second woman. There was another Cushite woman who married in addition to Tzipora. And Miriam and Aaron were very upset about this. And the Torah doesn't say why. And he says, we don't know why. I'm explaining this to you to show how extreme the interpretations are, because the pasuk is so nebulous about what happened. But today I want to focus on one more interpretation that I found really fascinating, very applicable, extremely relevant to many lives, and also inspiring to a certain degree. And it reads, quite interestingly, it reads very well. It fits very well with a pretty straightforward reading of the text. This interpretation is in a sefer called Moshev Skeinim Lebali HaTosfos. So you're talking about quite an early commentary of the Bali HaTosfos. The Bali HaTosfos means an addition, like Lahosif, Tosfos, an addition. In every standard Talmud, in every standard Gemara, you'll have on one side the commentary of Rashi, and on the other side a commentary called Tosfos. Tosfos is not one person. Tosfos means an addition. Rashi, who lived in the 11th century in France, Rashi lived in the 1000s and early 1100s in France, had 3 daughters. He didn't have any sons as far as we know. And these daughters gave birth to extraordinary children who founded a whole school of thought known in Jewish history as the Balei HaTosfos, those who added. They were all mostly Ashkenazic Jews, meaning they came from France and Germany, from the house of Rashi. And over 100 or 200 years, close to 2 centuries, they developed a whole method of learning. And they crown every page of Gemara, or many pages of Gemara, with their commentary, including many arguments with their own grandfather, or great-grandfather, or teacher. This was the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, and their students, not only family, from the house of Rashi. They also have commentary on Chumash. You have Das Skeinim in Mikra, you have Das Skeinim of Balei HaTosfos. One of the commentaries is known as Moshev Skeinim Mi Balei HaTosfos. These were authored in the 12th and 13th century in France. And they offer a new interpretation to this whole story. And what they say is, quite fascinatingly, a very different twist. And again, Rashi does not agree with this. Rashi has his interpretation that Miriam was taking up the honor and dignity of Tzipora as an older sister together with Aaron. Even though God got upset, their intentions were very were very positive. In fact, were very noble and very sensitive. That's Rashi's interpretation. It's similar to the Targum Onkelos. It says this in, you have, the Even Ezra has this commentary. Then you have the second commentary I said from the Rashbam that he married a Cushite woman from Ethiopia when he was running away from Egypt. You have the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel who also supports that. The Rashbam has a support in Yonasan ben Uziel. You have Rabbi Yosef ibn Kaspa who said he married a second woman and they were upset about that. Now we come to the Moshe of Skenim. I'm going to read to you what he says. Hari Mefarish. Rabbeinu Yitzchak, who's probably the grandson of Rashi, says, Lefi HaPshat, the literal meaning is Shekach Dibru Aaron and Miriam. Aaron and Miriam spoke about Moshe. What was their issue? The exact opposite issue. And it's important to learn this, to understand how these sensitive topics are inherent to the earliest moments of Jewish history, and how sometimes great people can develop certain perspectives, not because they're bad people, but because they genuinely feel this is the right thing. Aaron and Miriam said the following, I quote, V'chi chosid k'moy achenu haya loikeach goya. Can a pious man like our brother marry a non-Jewish woman? Can you say God told him to do this? God spoke to us as well. And the Re says, Amru loy leMoshe, Miriam and Aaron told Moshe, Sheyikach acheres miyucheses. It's time for him to marry another woman who comes from a Jewish family lineage. V'yaniach zois shehi midyanis. And let go the woman who he's married to now, who was a Midianite woman, not from a Jewish family. U'Moshe lo yiratza. And Moshe refused, arguing with his sister Miriam and his brother Aaron. What is their interpretation? They spoke about the Isha HaKushis Asher Lokach. And according to the Moshe of Skenim, it's also Tzipora. Not that he was separated from her. On the contrary, they wanted he should separate. What was the issue? What perturbed them? So let's recall the circumstances of Moshe's marriage to his wife. This goes back to Shmois. Moshe was a fugitive. He was running away from the sword of Parai. He arrives to a place called Midian. He meets the 7 daughters of Yisro who were being bothered and harassed at a well. He saves them. Who is Yisro? Yisro is a pagan priest. As our sages famously say, there was not a single idolatry in the world that he did not master and did not worship. Moshe, under these circumstances, wants to get married. Yisro offers him his daughter, and Moshe marries Tzipora. Where was Moshe at the time? He was a fugitive, he was a refugee, he was penniless, he had no family, he had no home, he had no community, and he marries Tzipora. Come Miriam and Aaron and say, but today, the circumstances are completely different. He is the greatest man of the generation. He's a prophet, he's a king, he's the man chosen by God to lead the Jewish people. He took them out of Egypt, he molded them into a nation, he gave them the Torah, the blueprint for life. Doesn't Moshe now deserve to marry a woman from Jewish royal blood? The fact is that Moshe Rabbeinu married a woman who grew up as a non-Jew. Her father was one of the top pagan priests in the region. She knew nothing about Jewish life, nothing about Jewish culture, nothing about Jewish existence. As they say in Yiddish, sepasnisht. Marriage should be min b'minoi. Moshe deserves a spiritual princess just like he is. And Tzipora wasn't that person. Tzipora had her quality. She wasn't that person. She wasn't the Siberian peasant I spoke about, but she was a Midianite, non-Jewish girl who grew up in paganism. That's who she was. And here people were looking, Moshe Rabbeinu, Rabban Shel Kol Yisrael, was the father of all the prophets, and his wife, you say, wow, where does she come from? Which Beis Yaakov did she go to? By Ruchel, by Sarah, by Sons, by Schana, by Rivka. I don't want to discriminate. She went into this school, that school. Who's her Zayda? Who was her Baba? Really? Wow, he was the chief rabbi of Bialystok, really, of Varsha. And he said, who are your sisters? Who are your brothers? It's so nice to meet you. Tell us about your family. And Sipora would say, my father really, he's in an ashram. He's 20 years. He goes to one ashram, then he goes to a monastery. He jumps around from God to God and so forth. And it seemed like there's something off here. This is Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore they told Moshe, this was good when you were a fugitive. Now you should remarry. That's how the Moshe of Skenim understands the story. At least a woman who grew up among the Jews, saturated with the Jewish culture. Somebody who knows the difference between knedlach and herring, between chaluptzis and kishka, or whatever it represents on many levels. They felt it's inappropriate for a spiritual giant, the spiritual leader of the generation, to have as a soulmate a person of such poor and impoverished lineage. Moshe refused. Why did Moshe refuse? Moshe told Miriam and Aaron he would never ever leave his wife Tzipporah. Why not? So the Moshe of Skenim quotes how he understands the debate. Moshe said, "Me'achar shelokcha kishahaya ani." She married me when I was penniless. I had nothing. Va'ata haya melech. Now I'm a king. Now he's a king. Lo yirotza legarsha. He will never divorce her now. V'lechein Amar. That's why Hashem describes Moshe with these words: B'chol beisi nemanhu. He is the loyalest person in my entire home. From all the adjectives that the Rebbeinu Shalom, the master of the world, chooses about Moshe, Neman. What does the word Neman? Neman doesn't mean holy. Neman doesn't mean transcendental. Neman doesn't mean heavenly. Neman doesn't mean sacred. Neman means trustworthy. Wie sagt man auf Yiddish Neman? Bagloibt. Bagloibt is nice. Getrei. Faithful. Getrei. Bagloibt means you're honest, like in terms of business. A word is a word, but it's not what he's talking about here. Obviously, it's part of that. Neman here is loyalty. Getreischaft. Absolute and unwavering dedication. You never ever betray trust. Why does Hashem choose this adjective? Because basically what Moshe was telling his siblings is, you guys don't understand Sipporah. I was without anything. She didn't marry me because Moshe Rabbeinu. Hindsight is 20/20. I was a nobody. I had nothing. I didn't even know if I'm ever going to see my family again. I grew up in royalty by non-Jews. I didn't live with my family. Then I decided to do the right thing and save a Jew, and I had to run away. I had nothing. I had the clothes that I was wearing. They even called him, when Yisro said, who was it? They said, Ish Mitzri. They called him an Egyptian man. She didn't marry me because my father was Amram, who was the Gadol Hadar, the Rambam says, the great giant of the generation. And Amram comes, of course, Amram is a son of Kahas. And Kahas is a son of Levi. And Levi is a son of Yaakov, Yitzchak, and Avram. And Levi was chosen as the tribe of holiness. Even Paroi didn't demand that the tribe of Levi works. He gave them the ability to segregate themselves and study. Even Paroi recognized that they should be treated differently. This is probably Yosef's credit, because Yosef allowed the priests of Egypt at the time to be treated differently. And as a result of that, Paroi allowed the tribe of Levi to remain spiritual even within the enslavement of Egypt. Amram was considered the prophet of the generation. His wife Yocheved was one of the great personalities of the generation. Miriam and Aaron were prophets. Moshe comes to Midian, and Tzipporah didn't know about all of this. Why did Tzipporah marry me, Moshe said. She married me for one reason, my character, my internal character. Now you want that because I have risen to such prominence and leadership, I should look at Tzipporah and say, you're not good enough. I need somebody with yichus, with distinguished lineage. Moshe completely rejected the thought that Miriam and Aaron communicated to him. Lo yirotzi, he said, no way, she is mine. She's my wife. So when Hashem wants to describe to Miriam and Aaron who Moshe is, he says, B'chol beisi nemanhu. His Ibegegebenkeit, his Getreischaft, his dedication, his loyalty, his faithfulness, and his devotion is unparalleled. B'chol beisi nemanhu. For Moshe, nothing, Hashem was saying, would be more important than this quality. Here was the wife of his youth, the woman who married him when he was vulnerable and broke and had nothing. Nothing ultimately mattered more. So you'll tell me, but shouldn't the Navi marry a woman who comes from a similar family? The fact that he came from the priestly family of Levi and she came from a pagan household. The fact you can imagine when Yisra came to visit, what the people will say. What an interesting father-in-law he has. He was the greatest leader of the generation who speaks to Hashem face to face. She came from a family of idolaters. So there was no family dynamic over there of Yiddishkeit. This was meaningless to him ultimately. Why? Because what mattered more than anything was her loyalty to him, which inspired his loyalty to her. But Hashem adds more than that. He says he's a real prophet. He speaks with me face to face and he sees my image. How does that contribute to the understanding of the story? What Hashem seems to be telling them, according to this interpretation, is this. People without God create new ones. You see, sometimes you'll meet people that say, I don't worship God, I don't believe in God. Well, everyone worships something. The question is only what you worship. Either you worship the real God or you create other things to worship. Everybody worships a God. They just have different names for it. In life, you worship something. Life is tough. The world is challenging. A lot of competing instincts going on in everybody's psyche. We end up worshiping something. I know no person who doesn't worship. The question is what you worship. Do you worship your ego? Do you worship your addictions? Do you worship money? Do you worship validation? Do you worship fame? Do you worship your insecurities? Do you worship social conformity? Do you worship peer pressure? I told you they once asked a 104-year-old woman, what's the advantage of living to this age? So she said, less peer pressure. We worship. What about fear? Fear becomes a god for many people. It dictates much of our life, just like God. Fear masters. We worship because we're human beings. We are mortal human beings. When somebody doesn't worship God, they create new ones to worship. And this is what Hashem is saying about Moshe Rabbeinu. Pel adaber boy. This is not just Moshe is a very nice person and a warm person. It's because of his intimate relationship with Hashem that allowed him to cultivate this perspective. It's because of his intimacy with God, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that allowed him to love and be sensitive and close to his wife in this way. People who don't have God in their lives, as I said, create new ones. So they do things for other people. Other people sometimes become our gods. The role that God is supposed to play, other people start playing. Sometimes the community, sometimes certain individuals. But God, we still worship. It's just a different God, has a different name. The Baal Shem Tov's father, I spoke Shavuos, when the Baal Shem Tov was 5 years old, he lost his parents. And his father on his deathbed, his name was Rabbi Eliezer. And he told his son, mamish moments before he passed away, he told him two things. He said, Zos nishmeire haben von kein Mensch und von kein Sach nicht äußer dem Obersten, zos lieb haben jeden Nid mit ein ganzer Herz und Neshama. Don't fear anybody or anything but God. Love every Jew with every fiber of your soul. And those became the two pillars that guided him and inspired his entire transformation of the Jewish landscape. But when the Baal Shem Tov's father told him, don't fear anything or anybody but God, it's not two separate things. It's not, I don't want you to be afraid of anybody. And I also want you to be afraid of God. It's dependent one on another. How could you not be afraid of anybody? There's always somebody you should be afraid of if you're normal. I could be afraid of my boss. Even somebody who has all the money and affluence in the world, there's always the one person who's a little richer, and you're trying to get to his level, you're trying to flatter him, you want him to become an investor. The question is where the bar is, but everybody worships somebody. So what do you mean don't fear anybody? How can you not fear anybody? People have a lot of power in this world. How could I not fear anybody? I shouldn't fear this one. What do you mean? They could do this, they could do this, they could threaten this. The answer is, if you fear God, then you have to fear nobody. If not, you have to fear somebody if you're a normal person. Unless you're completely meshuggah, then you got to fear yourself. So what happens is, people often do things for other people. Their barometer of right and wrong is often how it will look from my neighbors, from my relatives, from my siblings, from my nephews, from my community, from my friends. We often become busy with impressions. We want everything should look good. Appearances often matter much more than truth. In other words, appearances become my new God. That is what I worship. My decision-making process, how to go about something, what to do, what not to do, what comes into my decision process, not the real God. What comes into my decision process is, as they say in Yiddish, was wird man sagen? You ever heard that expression? What are they going to say? That becomes my God. That's what I worship. And for this, I will often make vital decisions about myself, my loved ones, my children. Moshe was on the opposite extreme. All that mattered to him was truth, nothing but the truth. Truth and more truth, and yet more truth. The petty considerations of what looks good, what sounds good, what all the yachnas on the block are going to say, was as important to him as another Yiddish quip, v'farayarike shnei. They were as relevant to him as the snow of 2003. You remember the snow of 2003? Not here, in New Zealand. That's how important these things were to him. As important as the snow that fell 20 years ago in Antarctica. They simply didn't mean anything to him. He was onav ma'oid. That's why the Torah says he was the humblest person on earth. He didn't need the prima donna of the century, Miss America. Moshe Rabbeinu cared for someone about whom he can say the same words. In my house, she is loyal. And in her house, I am loyal. Because God could say about both of them, in my home, she's loyal. I met recently a rabbi who told me a very moving personal tale about himself. His daughter is a very fine and lovely young woman. He comes from a very prominent family of rabbis of dozens of generations, literally. Very prominent European rabbis of particular descent. And she met a very fine, wonderful, wise, dedicated young man. And as I said, she comes from like a family of, I would say, what some people would like to call aristocracy within the Jewish religious world. Not Rebbish, no. Different group. There are other aristocrats in the Jewish world. The boy she met is a convert. He's a ger. Both of his parents and all of his siblings and of course his grandparents are not Jewish. He converted. They decided to get married. The rabbi told me that he and his wife were absolutely crushed. I thought to myself, he tells me these words, I thought to myself, I'm going to be photographed at the wedding with my mechutin. My mechutin is not Jewish. What are my siblings going to say? What are my uncles going to say? What are my aunts going to say? What are all my friends going to say? This is what he did. He couldn't do better. This is what I was thinking. And he said, I'm being open with you and honest with you. This went through my mind. And I spoke to my daughter. And she said, this is what I want. And he tried to convince her out of it. And his wife tried to convince her. They sent her to a therapist, of course. And then another therapist. I said, what did the therapist say? The therapist said, she really likes him. It's not an illness. It's not trauma. not insecurity. She's not crazy. She's not trying. She really thinks this boy will be a great marriage partner. The rabbi told me these words. He said, I sat down with myself and I thought about it. And then I told myself, if I am opposing this marriage because I think the relationship won't work or it's not good for my daughter, kudos onto me and my wife. But if I'm opposing this relationship because of my own phobias, because of the fact, that we will marry a family with parents that are not Jewish and grandparents that are not Jewish, no Judaism in the family. He himself, the boy himself, converted. He was born as a non-Jew. And that's the sole reason we're opposing it, not because of the quality of the relationship. I have to quit my job in the rabbinate. He has a very big community. I decided I have to quit my job because I am simply an absolute hypocrite. I always preach from the pulpit that we're all God's children. Every soul has infinite value. I always repeat the psukim of the Torah that converts to Judaism have to be treated with absolute dignity, respect, and love. And here I am doing the exact opposite thing. He went to his own father, the potential grandfather. And he went to consult him. His father is his mentor, and he told him the story. My daughter met Ploini Almoini. He's a convert. I'm struggling with it. Therapy is really not working. It's not a psychological issue. She really likes this boy. He likes her. They want to get married. And what should I do? And his father told him that one of his siblings had a similar situation. The father of the bride, one of his siblings had a similar situation. And he consulted his Rebbe, who rebuked him for falling prey to externalities and not issues of substance. So he said, listen, that's what I have to say. He was shocked that his father would tell this to him. He didn't think his father had that attitude. So the rabbi told me, he said, Rabbi Jacobson, I decided to embrace the situation from an authentic, divine perspective, not from a social PR vantage point. The social conversation, I decided, may play a role somewhere in my consciousness, but I will not allow it to dictate my life. I marched down the aisle with joy, pride, admiration for my daughter and for her soulmate. I knew that he was a really great person, a wonderful, wonderful human being, a mensch, a real Yirei Shamayim, a real God-fearing person, and a Ben Torah, dedicated to Torah. I knew how dignified and refined he was. I met him, and I saw it. And he told me that chuppah, when my daughter got married to this boy, he said it was one of my most intimate moments with God of truth. He said that was a moment when I felt an intimacy with Hashem that I didn't feel at other moments. And I understood him very well, because that's what Hashem says about Moshe. B'chol beisi nemanhu. In my entire house, he is the most faithful. A woman once told me she grew up in a very religious Hasidic community, and one of her children struggled a lot with Judaism. And he married somebody fast and pressure-oriented marriage, and they got divorced. And then he met another girl from a very different type of background, very different type of lifestyle, but it worked for him. They were both committed and growing together in Yiddishkeit, and they got married. And she told me all of her friends and relatives came to the wedding, and on their faces, it seemed like they were coming to a shiva house. They were almost like there to comfort her on the Nebuchadnezzar situation, that her son ended up with such a girl. And they looked, with this feeling of empathy, we still know you're a good person, and we'll still talk to you, like one of those. And she said, and I felt bad for them, because for me, it was the happiest night in my life. This does not mean by the way, I think I have to emphasize it because people sometimes are really clueless and they repeat back to me what I said. This does not mean that a family is not important. This does not mean that who a person's parents are, grandparents are, siblings are not important. It's very important. What this means is that the most important question concerning family and lineage is only one question. How does it contribute to the character of the person your daughter or your son are marrying? When the issue becomes more about family than character, more about externals than internal nature, more about what the street is going to think and what this one is going to say, more than about if your daughter and son are going to be truly happy in this relationship, then we have replaced the God of truth with the God of appearances. So is yichus important? Is family important? Is background important? Everything is important, anything that contributes. But what makes it important is what it does to the person, not independent idols that people worship that really have very little consequence on the marriage itself. And when that happens, very often, people suffer in silence because of the ill decisions of people who should show much more responsibility. I received a call a little while ago from a father. He asked me to call his daughter and convince her to go to the Copa. I said, I should convince your daughter, what's the problem? He said, she doesn't want to get married. I said, when is the wedding? She says, tomorrow night. I'm like, oh, so you called me a day before, that's great. He says, I didn't realize it's such a crisis, I'm sorry. I said, what happened? She said that she realized certain things and she really doesn't want to marry this guy. It's going to end up in divorce and misery. So I said, I'm happy, she could call me, I'll speak to her. But you realize that if this is what she's feeling, you may have to postpone the wedding until there's clarity. You know, maybe it's going to work out, maybe it's not going to work out, but I don't think you should force a girl into marriage. It's not the right thing halachically and on any other level. Halachically, you're not allowed to force a woman to get married. It's forbidden. It's forbidden by Torah. It's like you're not allowed to. It's a mitzvah that it has to be completely by consent. Just like you don't eat pork at a wedding, you're not going to serve pork at your daughter's wedding. If you force your daughter into a marriage, it's like maybe worse than serving pork. So I think you have to postpone it, and then let's see what's happening. Maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't work out. Maybe it's just an external thing. Maybe it's not serious. He said, no. That's not an option. The wedding is happening, and I need you to convince her to go to the chuppah with smiles. So I say, so you want me to drug her up or give her a tranquilizer and we'll make her smile? Why don't we do the wax museums? We could stuff up a doll that looks like your daughter. We'll get an artist and put her in the chuppah. For the pictures, it'll be actually better because everything will be perfect and the makeup never gets ruined. And do a stuffed doll. You could do that also. So he says, what do you... He says, what's that? I need you to convince her. I said, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I can't do this in good faith and conscience. I could listen to her, and I could tell her if I think it's something to be concerned about or not concerned about. But I'm not going to pressure. She's not a robot. She's a person. You want her to get married. I said, let's think about the alternative. I said, what if the alternative is you put a sign on the hall that due to some situations, the wedding has to be postponed. We apologize for everybody's inconvenience. He starts screaming at me. He says, you know the bushes? The shame I'm going to have in shul on Shabbos? So I said, I'm sure. I wouldn't be comfortable coming into shul on Shabbos and people saying, why was his daughter's wedding pushed off? I wouldn't be comfortable. But I find this quite tragic, that when I suggest that, you become furious because of the shame you're going to have in the community from your wedding being pushed off. What you didn't even mention once is the shame and the suffering that you're allowing yourself to cause your daughter of entering into a marriage with somebody she doesn't want to. Don't you sense that shame? And which shame do you think is more important? And I'll be honest with you. If I get a text or an email that this wedding was pushed off, most people, they'll think about it for approximately 8.5 seconds until the next text comes in. And usually the next text comes in 2 seconds. The next WhatsApp comes in a second. The next email comes in a nanosecond. And even the two gossip guys on your block and the two yentis on your block that are going to talk about it, it's going to be for around 2.5 days. And then there's going to be a new parsha, because in your community every week there's a parsha. There'll be a new parsha and they'll forget about it. But you want your daughter to remain like this for 70 years so that people shouldn't talk for 2 hours about you. I said, you have a different God than I do. I'm sorry. He listened, and his response was even more tragic. He said, Rabbi Jacobson, you know and I know that you're 100% right, but this is where I live. Sorry, thank you for your help. Bye. In other words, he said, you're right, but this is where I live. What does this mean? What this means is that we come to a point where we often, mamish, replace a real God with mamish fake idols that have nothing to do with any truth. I want to read to you a letter from the Rambam. And this is what I want to conclude with. I copied it today. And this will speak for itself. And this was not said by a rabbi in 2018. This was written by the Rambam. The Rambam, hands down, is considered one of the greatest authorities in Jewish history and Jewish law. The Rambam has svarim, but he also has letters that he wrote to people. There's a sefer called Shal Sutshuvas HaRambam, the responsa of the Rambam. And this is 12th century, 1100s. There was a Jew whose name was Evadia. Evadia was a convert, a non-Jew who converted to Judaism. As every convert, he needed teachers. Every person needs teachers, but a convert especially, who comes from a non-Jewish home, needs teachers. Evadia got into an argument with his Rebbe, with his teacher. He was a Muslim. He was a Muslim who became a Jew. He told his Rebbe that the Muslims don't worship idolatry. They believe that Muhammad is a prophet, but they worship one God, which many of the poskim, including the Rambam, believe that Christianity had a definition of idolatry. Islam did not. Islam was based on the error, on the myth that Muhammad is a prophet and he changed the Torah. He gave a new religion, but not on idolatry. It's something else. So this Evadia, the convert, told his Rebbe that Yishmaelim, Muslims, are not idol worshippers. And his Rebbe told him that he's wrong. They are idol worshippers. And the Rambam writes to Evadia, I'm going to quote, you write to me that your Rebbe responded to you inappropriately till the point that you got depressed, you were hurt. And you got ashamed from his response to you. In other words, he didn't just disagree with you, he basically shamed you for your position. And when he saw that, the teacher said on you the following verse, respond to a fool according to his foolishness. And he writes to the Rambam this story to get the insight of the Rambam. He was a convert. Converts, by definition, are very innocent and pure. And they don't have usually the chutzpah that homegrown tomatoes have, because they're not homegrown. You know, they're not natives. They have the feeling of being from somewhere else. So he comes to the Rambam, and this is his Rebbe, and he felt horrible. So he goes to the Rambam to find out, if his feelings of depression are justified or not. So the Rambam responds, the fact is that the Muslims are not Ovdei Avodah Zarah. They don't worship Avodah Zarah. There's no idolatry by them. They believe in one God and in complete oneness. That's not the issue. Okay, and he discusses that. That's in terms of the content. The fact that your teacher responded inappropriately and made you despondent and depressed and shamed you and called you a fool, and he calls him your Rebbe, this is your Rebbe, Aveir Gdoila Biyadai. He did a great sin. V'chata chet gadol. he transgressed a tremendous violation. V'korav be'enai sheshoigighu. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. I believe that perhaps he didn't realize it was inadvertent. But v'royu lo levakish mimcha mechila. He has to ask forgiveness. The right thing is for him to ask you forgiveness. Afal pi she'ata talmidai. Even though you're his student, a teacher doesn't have the right to manipulate or embarrass or put down a student. V'acher kach yotzum. And then your teacher has to fast. V'yizak, and he should cry out to God. V'yispalel, and he should pray. V'yikana, and he should surrender himself. Ula yischaper lo v'yimcha lo yakel yisala. Maybe God will forgive him. Maybe God will forgive him for what he did. And he continues. V'chishikir hoyaza? Is your Rebbe a drunkard? V'chishikir huza? Is he a drunk? Is he an alcoholic? V'lo yada, he doesn't know shebeshloishim v'shishim mekaymes is here a Torah alager? That there's 36 places that the Torah warns Jews not to be insensitive to a convert. Did he forget a pasuk? That biblically the Torah prohibits to say words that can hurt the feelings of a convert. Even if he was right and you were in a blunder, you were lost. Even if he was right, he still should have spoken to you softly and showed you a countenance of dignity and respect. Especially, you were right and he was wrong and he's insulting you. Here's where he comes to the sharpest point, which is really a very psychological point. And he says, and look at what he did. He got angry at you to the point that he publicly shamed an honest convert. Why? Because he claimed that the Muslims are worshiping idols. What did he do? He got furiously angry, which the Gemara Chazal say somebody who gets angry, it's like Avodah Zarah. So what he was suspecting them of, he actually fell prey to himself. Look what happened in that conversation. And I want to tell you now, that the obligation that the Torah gave us towards converts, gdoilahi, it's awesome. And then he says something quite shocking. Al ha'ov ala aim nitztavinu b'kavod u'moira. When it comes to a father and a mother, the Torah says you have to respect your father and mother and have reverence from your father and mother. Al hanavim, on the prophets, the Torah says you have to listen to the prophets. You have to respect tati and mami and listen to the prophet. But ve'efsher sheyichabed adam ve'yira ve'yishma mimisha einoi oyavoy. The fact is, you could respect somebody that you don't love. You could honor somebody that you don't love. You can have reverence from somebody that you don't love. And you could listen to somebody who you don't love. And nowhere in the Torah does it say love your mother or love your father. Because if it's not there, you can't force a child to do that. The Torah says respect your father, respect your mother. You have to have awe, reverence from your father and mother. It doesn't say love. Even the prophets, he says, you could listen, you could respect, you could fear somebody, you don't love them. Va'al hagerim tzivanu ba'ahav harabah. On the Gerim, there's a special pasuk, v'ahavtem es hager, a special mitzvah, love the convert. Like there's a mitzvah to love God, there's a mitzvah to love a convert. God himself loves a convert. And if there's not enough, the Rambam writes this to the Ger. He says, now I'm quite astonished that he called you the fool. Let's analyze who's the fool. I'm astonished that he calls you a fool. Why? These are his words. You're a person, you let go of your father, you abandon your father, your entire household, your birthplace, your religion, your heritage, your monarchy, your entire nation, even though they have unbelievable military and political power. You left it all behind. Why? Because with your mind's eye, You wanted to cleave to the one nation that despises all of the great power that they have in the world because it's not based on truth. You realize that there's a religion of people who are persecuted and hunted, but that it's based on truth. You realize that all the religions, whatever they have, are all stolen from the Jewish religion. This one adds, this one subtracts, this one changes, this one lies, this one covers up on 5 cardinal sins using Judaism, this one destroys the foundations of Judaism, this one changes Judaism. You realize that all of them have stolen what they have, the good things from Judaism, and the rest is their distortions. You recognize this, and you started to chase God. And you embarked on a holy path, and you entered onto the wings of the Shekhinah, and you decided to submerge yourself in the dust by the feet of Moshe Rabbeinu, the rabbi of all the prophets, and you desired his mitzvahs, and your heart elevated you to come close to the light and to the life, and to ascend in the steps of the angels, and to rejoice and find pleasure in the joy of the tzaddikim, and you threw out the whole superficial world from your heart, and you don't follow idols and lies and falsehood. Are you the person who should be called a fool? I would never call you a fool, Chalila. Let me tell you my name for you. The Rambam says, my name for you is Maskil, Umevin, Upikeach, V'hoylech Nechoichos, Talmidoi Shel Avraham Avinu, Sheiniach Avoisav V'moiladetoi V'nota Acharei Hashem. My name for you is an intelligent, discerning, wise person, a man who walks in justice and straightness, a student of Avraham Avinu, who like Avraham Avinu, said goodbye to his parents and his birthplace in order to follow God. This is the response of the Rambam to Ovadia Hager. This gives you a little perspective today. In every community, there are many Jews who converted to Judaism, or on another level, they didn't convert to Judaism, but they didn't grow up with it. And at a later point, they came closer to Yiddishkeit, and they too had to say goodbye to their entire culture, lifestyle, behavior, ways in which they lived, sometimes notwithstanding the mockery of their own mother, their own father, their own siblings, their own cousins, who looked at them and said, either explicitly or implicitly, you're a normal girl. You're a normal boy. We raised you, as somebody once told me, I don't know what happened to my child. A mother told me, I raised him with glatt treif. I raised him on glatt treif. Where did he get these feelings? I told her, you have to check your mezuzahs. And that mockery is sometimes the deepest form of mockery. What often happens, though, is they come in to a Jewish community and a Jewish life. In the beginning, they're very idealistic. They see the beauty of Yiddishkeit and the beauty of a Shabbos table and so forth. Then sometimes different things happen. There's sometimes disillusionment and other sources of pain and agony. One of the greatest sources of pain and agony is the self-righteousness that so-called FFB people, from birth people, or Fablonjet from birth people, show to anybody who didn't grow up in their school system, their nusach, don't have their phobias and insecurities, don't have the same language, don't stick to the same club and clique and circle. And very often, Balei Tshuva are converts who want to fit in and want to become socially integrated. They have to give up a part of their truth and their soul in order to fit in. And the great irony and paradox of what happened. The whole Judaism is based on the quest of people for truth, on the quest for people to communicate honestly, without agendas and without politics and without cover-ups. And the people who came to Judaism for that reason are often forced unconsciously by people who grew up with Judaism to start putting on masks and more masks and more masks and more masks just to fit in. And especially when it comes to the great parsha of Shidduchim, to the great parsha of matchmaking, and when it comes to getting in children to different schools and different yeshivas and different seminaries. It's good Avraham Avinu wasn't around today because he probably wouldn't be allowed into any yeshiva with a father like Terach, and I assume Rivka would have been thrown, certainly not accepted by any seminary with a father like Lavan and Lavan's children. With a father like Psuel and Rachel and Leah, I don't know what would have happened to them, and there wouldn't be Jews today. None of them would have been accepted anywhere. Thank God somebody else made their shidduch. And what we see here from this Moshe of Skenim is that this issue wasn't an issue only between small people. No people as great as Miriam and Aaron struggle with the same issue. And yet this upset Hashem so deeply, because he said, Moshe, you have to understand, B'chol Beisi Nemanhu. What he ultimately values more than anything else is Getreischaft, truth, loyalty, integrity, honor, duty, respect, truthfulness, and dedication. In fact, every morning when we describe why Hashem chose Avraham, the Navi decided to use the same words. Atuhu Hashem Elokim asher bacharta ba'Avram v'yitzeisim mirkazdim v'samta shmoi Avraham u'matzasa es levavoi neman lefanacha. You found his heart neman. What's this quality? Avram was a genius. Avram was the greatest theologian and philosopher of his time. Avram discovered monotheism. Avram was an extraordinary person. I have to discuss Avram Avinu's milas. But the Navi describes him, Matzasa es levavoi neman lefanacha. Almost the greatest quality of Avram, it seems, was you found his heart neman, getrai, faithful, the Ibegegebenkeit. In a way, you could translate it as the Ehrenskeit. Ehrenskeit in terms of the seriousness that comes with authenticity, not the seriousness that comes with depression or OCD. There's two types of seriousness. There's a seriousness that comes because you're always in a bad mood. There's seriousness that comes with authenticity. Authentic people have a seriousness to them, not because they don't have a sense of humor. There's a seriousness that defies humor, because you're in people who are miserable hate people who have a good sense of humor, because they like to cheer things up and they like everybody to be miserable. But people whose seriousness comes from authenticity, they usually are very good with humor, because they don't take themselves seriously. They take the cause seriously. It's a seriousness that comes from authenticity. A person who's very truthful, deep down, when you reach their core, you'll see a seriousness, an unwavering commitment and dedication. It never contradicts humor, because it's coming from a place of a deep value, not from a place of escaping misery or agony. And therefore, when Hashem wants to describe Avram, the Navi says, Matzasa es levavoi neman. Fascinatingly, when he has to explain to Miriam and Aaron who Moshe is, he uses the same word. B'chol Beisi Nemanhu. When he uses the word Beisi, God doesn't have a home. The whole world is his home, and above the world is his home. But it's also referring to his marriage. B'chol Beisi, in a home. Ishta, Gemara, the Mishnah says, Beisi zu Ishta. Rabbi Yossi didn't call his wife only his wife. He called his wife the home. The whole home. He knew that his wife is the whole home. So B'chol Beisi Nemanhu means in his entire home, in his entire marital life, there's one quality above all. And that's the Ne'emonus, the Getreischaft, the Ehrenskeit, the seriousness of a relationship that comes from authenticity, from integrity, from the fact that you have a real God that you will sell for nothing and nobody. Have a wonderful week.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.